Hello and welcome to the 35th edition of the GreenWave podcast by SYNI International. I'm SYNI, your host, and today's topic is the European Union Hydrogen Bank. Specifically, what is wrong with the EU Hydrogen Bank and why are so many winners of the biggest subsidies walking away from completing their green hydrogen projects? We're talking about 3 of the largest green hydrogen projects in the EU, turning an icy shoulder to €589 million of EU support during this blazing hot summer. So join us for the next 20 minutes, as we'll need more than sun cream and a beach umbrella to unravel this one. The premise of the EU Hydrogen Bank is elegant. Put a predictable premium on every kilogram of renewable hydrogen that leaves an electrolyser. Use a competitive auction to reveal cost, select the lowest bids, and pay that fixed premium for a long enough period to bridge the delta versus fossil hydrogen. The funding comes from carbon markets and innovation funds, not from thin air. The scheme focuses on H2 molecules delivered rather than promises made. For a continent that loves rules and loathes waste, this should be a tidy fit. The practice has been a little less tidy. This summer offered a sharp lesson. Several of the largest announced winners from the most recent auction withdrew in quick succession. 3 exits in one burst do not count as variance. They signal a design that looks efficient on paper and unforgiving in the field. Zvonk in the Netherlands, with €246 million of support. Catalina in Spain, with €230 million, and H2 Hub Lubmin in Germany, with €112 million, all stepped away in the last months. And it's not just about the EU money, as roughly 1.3 gigawatts of electrolysis vanished from the forward curve. That is a blown transformer. Why did they step away? The short answer is bankability. The longer answer starts with time. Projects are expected to move from award to financial close very quickly, with final investment decisions locked and kit ordered on a clock that would have made sense when construction queues were short and permits sailed through. They are also expected to enter operation on another tight clock and to show hard evidence of offtake from customers whose own infrastructure, standards, and board approvals live on yet another calendar. Developers also face rules for renewable hydrogen that aim for the right destination and create a hard path to get there. Additionality requires that the electricity used to make hydrogen comes from new renewables, not from repurposed clean power that is already decarbonising the grid. Temporal and geographic correlation require that the electrons and the electrolyser are matched in time and space with increasing precision across this decade. These principles are sensible, and they add layers of proof that demand digital systems, commercial arrangements, and sometimes physical links that will only be fully mature near the end of the decade. The premium itself is fixed. A fixed premium has virtues. It avoids complex two-sided settlements, and it is simple to explain. It also pushes power price risk firmly onto the producer. If the market price of wholesale electricity spikes or diverges from the long-term power purchase agreement, the producer absorbs the variance. If supply chains lift the capital cost and interest rates are sticky, the producer absorbs that too. A fixed premium with no indexation to inflation and no transparent link to power costs looks stable in the policy brief. But it looks like a potential liability on a project finance model. Then there is stacking. Playing with the EU is a team sport. Member states have their own instruments that they want to align with the hydrogen bank. In some cases, the current rules allow stacking of national funds on top of the European award, within strict caps and with careful accounting. In other cases, the interpretation is tighter, and the room for a national top-up shrink. The result is hesitation. Project sponsors must reconcile which sources can sit together, on what terms, and with what sequence of approvals, and how long that sequence will take. When the auction clock starts, before the stacking puzzle is solved, It is not hard to predict that caution wins. Offtake is the next hurdle. The Europe-wide ambition for renewable hydrogen stretches across refineries, ammonia, methanol, steel, shipping fuel, and heavy transport. Yet many of those off-takers are still solving their own economics. A refinery must decide on where to place capital between carbon capture, fuel switching, and product slate change. A steel plant must line up ore, power, and downstream customers willing to pay for low-carbon steel. A port must plan for storage, safety codes, and bunkering routines that involve fresh training and insurance. Every one of those decisions interacts with standards for green molecules and certificates of origin that are still being harmonized. The Hydrogen Bank asks producers to present firm offtake while their counterparties are still trying to prove their own cases to their boards. Infrastructure is the quiet protagonist. Pipelines, compressor stations, import terminals, and storage caverns take time and public coordination. The same goes for offshore wind grids, onshore substations, and high-voltage connections across borders. Some European corridors are advancing at speed. Others are real, funded, and still scheduled for the early 2030s. When a developer cites a specific corridor that will connect a coastal electrolyzer to demand centres only at the start of the next decade, the timeline mismatch becomes obvious. Spreadsheets do not weld pipelines, schedules do. Certification and law are another pair of moving parts. The EU's Renewable Energy Directive in its current form has to be transposed by every member state. Delegated acts on additionality and greenhouse gas accounting set the bones for what counts as renewable hydrogen in Europe. Guarantees of origin must align with renewable fuel of non-biological origin rules and provide a view of carbon intensity that is verifiable by third parties. Several countries are doing this diligently. Several are doing it with debate. The result is that a developer who wins in an EU-wide auction still faces a national interpretation that might not match the assumptions used in the bid. There is also the psychology of auctions. If a competition rewards price above all else, lean bids will win. That is the point. It is also a recipe for paper projects. A lean bid at a time of high interest rates and tight supply chains can look clever in April and unfinanceable in September. Deliverability does not show up in a single number. Bankable power, secured land, advanced permits, real off-takers with balance sheets, and a credible commissioning plan all matter. An auction design that gives serious weight to those factors, rather than treating them as pass or fail, will select different winners. To be sure, this is not our call to abandon the premium model. It is a call to tune it so that delivery risk is priced and managed rather than ignored. Index a portion of the premium to inflation and to a transparent power cost reference. That does not turn the scheme into a two-sided contract for difference. It simply acknowledges that producers cannot carry every macro shock while still offering Europe a low headline price. Allow phased commissioning so that a project can start at a real initial capacity, prove operations, and ramp as infrastructure and offtake scale. Make room for compliant national top-ups within clear ceilings so that member states can back their industrial regions without tripping over state aid lines. Align the milestone deadlines with the real timelines of permitting and grid build. The time from winning to financial close should reflect how long it takes to secure a final grid connection, close a power purchase agreement for new renewable capacity, and sign an offtake that clears internal risk committees. Provide standard offtake templates with allocation of risk that banks can recognise, and give buyers comfort with a light touch guarantee facility or aggregator that steps in if a buyer defaults. These are all important real-world adjustments. Pair the supply premium with targeted demand tools in exposed industries. Carbon contracts for difference for chemicals and steel can reward the use of green hydrogen and its derivatives by paying the difference between the carbon price signal and what is needed to close the gap to low-carbon products. A refinery that can earn a predictable top-up for low-carbon fuels will sign longer offtake. A steelmaker that can underwrite green steel premiums with a transparent instrument will lock in supply. European policymakers already see some of this. Another alternative is planned that keeps the fixed premium and seeks to adjust rules at the margin. That is welcome. The question is whether the margin will be enough to bring the projects that can actually build. The 3 withdrawals this summer suggest that incremental tweaks are only part of the answer. The structure needs to reward the probability of molecules in tanks and pipes by the date stated, not simply the price written in the bid. Now let's zoom in on risk allocation. A developer faces construction risk from electrolyzer delivery and balance of plant. That risk is manageable with good partners and the right covenants. There is performance risk from stack degradation and utilization levels. That is manageable with warranties and conservative modelling. There is regulatory risk from changing interpretations of additionality and hourly matching and cross-border certificates. That is manageable only when the law is clear and consistent across jurisdictions. There is power price and curtailment risk that becomes serious when the producer relies on grid-connected renewables in congested nodes. That is manageable with realistic correlation rules and indexation that reflects wholesale dynamics. There is off-take counterparty risk that cannot be fully diversified when a few large buyers dominate a regional market. That is manageable with partial guarantees or backstop facilities. The hydrogen bank takes only a slice of this stack today. Now, the supply chain. Electrolyzer costs have been falling in theory. In practice, delivered cost into Europe for bankable equipment reflects order backlogs, balance sheet strength, and local content rules. EPC capacity is stretched across data centres, transmission build-out, battery factories, and offshore wind. Substations and large transformers are on long lead times. Ports are busy. None of these constraints last forever. They do matter during a tight financial close window where any delay can tip a project from feasible to fictional. Next, the power source. Many early projects planned co-development with offshore wind or large solar. The coupling is logical. The correlation rules make it logical and complex. If an offshore wind zone faces delay in a shared grid hub, the electrolyzer downstream loses its power source in the appointed window. If the renewable project must be new to satisfy additionality, it will not be easy to swap in a legacy wind farm as a backup. That makes the commissioning deadline a cliff edge. Phasing and grace periods can reduce the severity of the edge while keeping discipline. Some of our GreenWave listeners might also ask whether the winners simply bid too low. There is a truth here. Competitive auctions create pressure to outdo peers. A low bid brings reputational headlines for a few news cycles and a financing headache for the next 2 years. The cure is straightforward. Elevate deliverability in scoring. Require more proof at the bid stage. Reward bidders who bring land control, grid progress letters, mature permits, and real offtake term sheets with weighted points, not just pass marks. Publish a transparent deliverability score alongside clearing price to set the tone. Investors will read it. Banks will read it. Developers will know that the race is not only about the last cent. Here is another truth. Europe has no shortage of capital nor interest in sustainable energy. It has a shortage of certainty. Institutional capital does not fear risk. It fears unpriced risk. The hydrogen bank can convert unpriced risks into priced ones with a handful of tweaks. Index a portion of the premium. Clarify stacking. Extend realistic windows. Standardize offtake. Signal that matching rules will have stable grace mechanisms that respect real-world grid operations while protecting the integrity of green claims. What about imports? Some argue that Europe should lean more on imported molecules in the early years, given wind and solar resource in other regions, and the promise of low-cost derivative fuels like ammonia. Imports will play a role. They still need terminals, safety codes, and reconversion or direct use in industry. A port that can safely handle large ammonia volumes must invest in equipment and training, and communities must be comfortable with risk management. Domestic production and imports should be seen as complementary. The bank can support both by enabling anchored, phased capacity that grows as the ecosystem grows. Let us also speak to measurement. The credibility of green hydrogen claims depends on transparent accounting of emissions across the value chain. A kilogram from a plant that runs on hourly matched offshore wind has a different profile from a kilogram from a plant that buys a monthly matched solar PPA in a congested grid with high marginal emissions during evening ramps. Europe has taken a principled stance on this. It is right to keep that stance. It is also right to ensure that the digital and contractual tools to prove it exist at scale before they are mandated in a way that stops investment. A stable roadmap toward tighter temporal correlation, paired with reliable registries and cross-border recognition, will give everyone a map they can finance. What about price discovery? A single premium for 10 years provides a clean headline. It hides volatility in power markets and offtake markets that the producer is asked to swallow, perhaps in a fatal dose. One option is to retain a fixed base premium and add a modest floating collar tied to a published index of renewable power cost in the relevant zone. That is not a complicated system. It would guard against a world where power prices step change for reasons outside the control of the developer. Another option is to allow a share of early year production at a higher premium with an automatic decline over time as capex is recovered, all within the same envelope of support. Both ideas retain the spirit of pay for production. Both reduce the chance that a macro swing in operating expense kills a project. Another thought is that administrative rhythm matters more than people think. A project pipeline needs predictable auctions with predictable rules. Change is inevitable in a young market. Constant change is paralysis. Certainty invites courage. Finally, let us revisit the 3 withdrawals without turning this into theatre. The names are less important than the pattern. Each case involved a complex integration of power, infrastructure, and demand. Each case faced a timeline and a risk allocation that rendered final investment difficult. One pointed to delays in a regional corridor that shifts connective infrastructure into the early next decade. Another sat at the intersection of power projects and industrial customers who are in the midst of their own major shifts. The third was shaped by import terminal planning and pipeline availability. You do not need a magnifying glass to see the common thread. The current auction rules reward low price in a vacuum and expect high certainty in the real world. Not a realistic combination in today's green hydrogen world. So, what should change between now and the next auction window? Keep the premium per kilogram paid for real production. Index a portion to inflation and a transparent wholesale power reference. Allow phased commissioning with pre-agreed ramp bands. Create a stacking playbook that sets out clear rules for combining national support with the Hydrogen Bank Award, with clear caps and a single point of contact for approvals. Align entry into operation windows with realistic permitting paths and dated infrastructure dependencies in the public domain. Publish standard offtake templates and support a light-touch offtake aggregator or guarantee for the first years of operation. Weight deliverability in bid scoring with a transparent matrix. In reality, that's quite an exhaustive list to redraft by the next planned auction at year-end. There is also a need to bring the rest of the family to the table. Demand-side tools in steel, chemicals, and transport should be visible to producers before they place bids. Certification bodies and registries should pre-confirm how they will handle hourly matching and cross-border proof before projects sign. Grid operators should publish corridor commissioning dates and contingencies in a form that developers can rely on. National authorities should coordinate on how they will treat renewable hydrogen in planning, safety, and industrial policy. This is a lot of coordination. It is still cheaper than watching awardees walk away. There is also a cultural point. Europe excels at writing blueprints. It sometimes expects reality to follow the blueprint out of admiration. Reality has its own agenda. Offshore wind taught this lesson with rising costs, and the sector is now adjusting with renegotiations, new indexation, and smarter auctions that value system integration. Hydrogen can skip the drama if it learns early. Reward those who can build where the grid and the pipelines are ready, even if the poster project sits in a region that will be a star later in the decade. Give points for pragmatism. None of this asks for lower ambition. The end state remains the same: a European hydrogen economy that supports clean industry, low-carbon fuels, grid balancing, and energy security. Now is time to tighten up the process. Pick a route that matches the map. Set prices that make sense over time rather than only at award. Build credibility by paying for molecules that flow. Remove theatre. Keep discipline. To close, let us return to why this matters beyond the project finance niche. Hydrogen is not a talisman. It will not solve every decarbonisation problem. It is essential in a few hard cases: fertiliser, refining of certain streams, green steel, long-haul shipping fuel in derivative form, perhaps aviation fuel precursors, where other options fall short. If Europe wants sovereignty in these value chains, it needs the capacity to make green molecules and to import them with confidence, traceability, and safety. The Hydrogen Bank is the flagship for production. When its flagship winners leave the pier before sailing, the signal to the rest of the fleet is plain. So, what is wrong with the EU Hydrogen Bank? Nothing in principle, yet quite a bit in the details. Europe does not lack suitable projects. It does not lack capital, especially after €589 million of now unclaimed future funding. It does not lack industrial demand over the decade. It lacks bankable certainty at the point of decision. Move the scheme one turn towards certainty, and EU governments can keep taxpayers safe, while the bank will do what it was created to do. Reward production that is real, green, and timely. Put sovereign funds next to private capital with confidence. Choose results over headlines. It sounds like a simple shift because it is. It is also a test of practical leadership. Well, that's a wrap on our episode 35 GreenWave podcast episode. We appreciate your time and support for the pod. You already know you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Podchaser, Boomplay, and Player FM. Help us out by sharing one of these links with friends. We'd also love if you would leave a 5-star review. If you have missed any of our LinkedIn posts or the GreenWave Gazette, you can always catch us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or visit synergy-international.net. We'll keep reflecting on the trends shaping sustainable finance and global policy. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.